Welcome back to the 1-2 Punch. It's your girl, Maddie Levine, and I bring you all of your favorite fighters, and we always talk about the fight game. And today we're switching things up a little bit. He was a fighter at one point and still trains, but now he kind of goes on the mental aspect of things and helps fighters really perform to the best of their abilities by giving them really important tools on how to properly get in there fully ready, mentally ready with his brand called MindLock. He's a Toronto native, so he's coming all the way from Canada right now, and he's going to tell us about his Taekwondo background and how he kept me totally sane during my last fight. So Dylan Nadler, welcome to the 1-2 Punch.
What's going on? Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this. I mean, I am just so impressed, first of all, by your brand. It's called MindLock, but you started it at the age of 19. And I just can't get over that because I think about when I was 19 and it certainly wasn't me thinking about starting my own brand. So tell me a little bit about you're 19 years old and you decide I'm going to help fighters get mentally right. Like, how did this all begin?
Okay, we'll backtrack a bit because I think it'll make sense as we go along. Because yeah, when you put it that way, it does sound crazy. So growing up, even just from a little kid. So my dad was in advertising and marketing. So when I was young, like I kind of like was maybe more aware of these things. Even like from as far back as I can remember, I was always interested in like the why behind things, right? So like if there's a new car coming out, I was always wondering like, well, why'd they name it that? And like who's the audience that they were selling it to? And like, like even from like 7, 8 years old. So when I started doing sport, like those two things tied in together so perfectly, which was like the competing aspect of things and then like the why behind it, like the driving forces. So I mean, if you look at like my eighth grade yearbook, when it says where do you want to be in 10, 20 years, when everyone else is saying like fireman and police and like actor, mine said sports psychologist, as like a 12-year-old. So it's always been there in the back of my head. And because of that, it guided the way that I trained and the way that I competed. So, I was making sure to kind of incorporate these practices into my trainings as well. So when I stopped competing, it was almost like without hesitation, like, okay, like this is what I want to do, right? Like, why wait? I feel like I'm at a place where, I can get started with something like this. I'll see how it goes. I'll see if people like it. And I felt like I had developed enough experience to kind of, at least to an extent, like know what I was talking about. So I figured let's see how this goes and take it from there. So it was really something that was in the back of my head for a long time. So as soon as I stopped competing, it was really a no-brainer. Like, all right, well, let's move on and not dwell on the past and just kind of keep pushing.
And I think it's just so incredible that we'll get to how you were a freaking Olympian. Like we'll get to that part. But were you able to just use your own experiences to formulate MindLock, or did you kind of incorporate like other teachers that helped you out with this? Like, where did all of your expertise come from?
So it's I mean, like the mental game's tough, right? Like I think we're as time goes on, we're starting to understand like how impactful it is. But there's still not a lot of resources that we can use if we want to do those things, right? I mean, even if you ask athletes nowadays who are mentally tough and work on that stuff, like, well, what do you do? I mean, a lot of books, a lot of podcasts, more like passive learning types of things. And I was kind of the same way. I made sure to read a lot and watch a lot of kind of different types of videos and take courses and figure out like, okay, like how can I not just learn these things, but like apply them. Even if it was outside of sport, like different types of content that were maybe geared towards like different types of people or business or self-help, and trying to just kind of take all these pieces of kind of like execution, if you will, like the performance side of things, and figure out, how can I apply this to athletes? And like I said, it started with myself, and especially being in combat sports, understanding like what works and what doesn't work, and what made me feel really good, and what didn't work for me as much, kind of like trial and error on myself. And because for me, like I was never the tallest or the strongest or the fastest in my division, but I was definitely the toughest, right? And I made sure that like everything I did, I did it with 100% intensity, and the effort was there. So, kind of learning from myself and figuring, well, I'm kind of like the perfect case study for this. Let's see how applicable it is to other people. And then, figuring it out from there was the fun part.
It's certainly fun to be able to apply things that we work together with in our sessions. And, I was backstage at my last fight and I had my little goal pamphlet that you gave me and I'm going over all my goals. What has been, you think, the most successful tool that you give fighters that people seem to really resonate with?
Yeah, I think there's a few. I think, that identity statement sheet that we've gone through has been huge. And for everybody listening, what that is it's basically, an exercise where you think about, or you picture yourself kind of at your peak. You visualize that, and you label what you see in terms of I am statements, right? So things like I am fast, I'm resilient, I'm competitive, right? Whether they're physical attributes, mental, emotional, whatever. And then you write those things down, and then you basically follow that up with, visualizing it, right? So you go through it and not just seeing it, but really trying to embody it, right? So if one of those statements is I'm explosive, not just seeing, you being explosive, but feeling like what it's like to push off of the mats and to explode and to really embody all those things. And I think the mix of the kind of self-awareness piece beforehand to write those things down, the visualizing it, the feelings associated with it, it's a really kind of refreshing feeling for a lot of people, something that we don't really take as much time to do. But when you do it, it's like this addictive feeling because you always, finish it with your hand being raised and you just can't get enough. So I think that's one where I kind of sit back and watch people kind of have that like aha moment of like, man, this is cool. And that's always a good part for me.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly brought me to tears a couple times trying to think of like, oh my God, I feel so great right now. But I also think, positive self-talk, that is like a whole nother enemy or best friend, depending on how good you are with your self-talk. And that's something that I've struggled with forever is just not being able to almost allow myself to have a positive self-talk. So what are some tips that you give fighters to kind of like readjust that mental game of like, okay, it's time to start respecting ourselves and being nice to ourselves?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it starts off with the kind of greater understanding that we know how important positive self-talk is intuitively, right? When you talk to a teammate or you talk to a friend, we know what are good things to say and what aren't, right? You wouldn't look at someone that's low energy and at the end of their weight cut and say, what's wrong with you? Like, you look stupid right now, right? We know it wouldn't work, but for ourselves, we don't really allow that same grace, right? We're a little bit more direct, but if it wouldn't work for a teammate, it's not going to work for you, right? So we know that negative isn't always the way to go, but it's kind of the way that we've always done things. And it's been unchecked and kind of unregulated for so long. So I think when it comes to self-talk, it's important to remember that like a lot of these things, like you can't eliminate them, right? You can't eliminate negative self-talk the same way that you can't eliminate nerves. But what you can do is you can manage it, you can deal with it, right? So putting that positive spin and trying to figure out, well, how can I filter this into something good, right? So an example is like end of the camp, you're sore, you got some bumps and bruises, right? I mean, it's been a long training camp. The negative approach to that is, man, like I'm not 100% going into this fight, right? I've got some injuries, I tweaked my back, I'm not 100%. That's not going to help you when you go in, right? Positive spin on that is saying something like, I'm really prepared, right? Like the fact that I have these bumps and these bruises, it means that I've really exerted myself in this camp and I've done all the right things. Like I'm ready for this, I'm prepared. So it's a matter of spinning things a lot of the time. How can we take something that's seemingly negative, filter it through more of a positive lens to get a better result? Because at the end of the day, it's that positivity that we feed off of and it gets more out of our performance. Whereas when you dwell on the negative and you focus on what's wrong, it's all we can think about and it's inhibiting, right? So it's a really strong exercise to be able to take something that's negative and see the positive in it, not just in fighting, but in life itself too.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for people to know that your clients span from amateur level to UFC level. Like this is something that fighters on all levels deal with. And are you seeing kind of like a reoccurring pattern between fighters, or maybe there's something that fighters are typically dealing with a lot of? Like what are some things that you're seeing that people are trying to work through that you're seeing on all levels?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's a core one is a fear of failure and a fear of losing, right? I mean, it only makes sense, right? I mean, we compete to win, we want to win. Nobody wants to lose. And that's kind of a recurring thing is like this fear of like, man, like, what happens if I go out there and I lose? And that can be a feeling that really inhibits people from activating like their best self, right? And I think a way to think about it is like, well, if you're only focused on the outcome, it's going to be difficult to do the things that you want to do in there, right? And this goes back to goal setting, and it goes back to, well, when you think about setting a goal for your event, whether that's a fight or it's a game or it's a match, people tend to think like, okay, well, my goal is to win, right? Well, winning is it's an outcome. Winning is a result. It's not really a goal, right? Goals are like, what can I do to get myself closer to that, right? So a goal might be to, stuff some takedowns, or to manage my range, or to manage the ring, or to land more leg kicks, right? Like those are individual goals that you can achieve throughout the fight. And by achieving those things, you get yourself closer to the outcome, right? So when people are so hesitant and fearful of losing, it's like, well, focus on the process, right? It's that cliche, process versus outcome, right? But it makes sense. It's focus on the process, and the outcome kind of takes care of itself, right? Like when you knock over the first domino, you don't even have to think about the last one falling, because through the chain of events it happens. But if all you're ever doing is thinking about that last domino and you never hit the first one, it's not going to happen, right? So when it comes to that fear of failure and what if I lose, what if I lose, well, what if you win, right? Like, let's think of it through that way. Like, why not? What's stopping you from going out there and giving it your all? So focus on what are the little steps that you have to do throughout this match to set yourself up for success. And that's a little bit of a bite-sized nugget that can be a little bit more hopeful in terms of how you expect the fight to go.
And I think a big thing for me personally, and I'm sure there's other fighters that deal with this, it's believing that. It's believing that positive self-talk that I'm telling myself. It's believing that I'm capable of doing this. And I get tripped up a lot because I deal with like, oh God, I'm good, but like, I don't know if I'm good enough to win. And you almost have to train similar to physical training where we're constantly on the mats and we're constantly training. Would you agree that you have to train your mind to finally think positively in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't, then I might have to go into a different different industry. 100%. I mean, it's about getting your reps in, right? I mean, I say that all the time. You could learn an amazing drill, right, in practice. Something that works really well for people. But if you just learn it the one time and you go home and you don't think about it again, you're not going to really integrate it into your game, right? You have to drill things over and over and over again, whether it's things like positivity, whether it's goal setting, whether it's the ability to visualize properly and with clarity. You have to get your reps in, right? It's about how often are we doing these things? And the best part about getting reps in on the mental side is it's not as exerting as it is on the physical side, right? Sometimes to get those physical reps in, it's at a cost, and it's at a cost of recovery. It's at a cost of, like that physicality side. When it's on the mental side, those are hours that get counted towards your training without doing anything to you, right? You're not sweating. You don't have to change for it. You don't have to put on your gym clothes. Like, you get those reps in, you get to train, and you get to stay pretty much like unfazed physically. And that's another benefit of getting those mental reps in, is it all counts towards your training. Those are training hours you're putting in at very little cost physically. And I think we can really manipulate that to get the most out of our game.
Absolutely. And this isn't just some, psychologist pretending like he knows the fight game. Dylan absolutely knows the fight game. And I'm so excited for you to talk about your background, because at one point you were the captain of the Olympic Taekwondo team for Canada. And I know that's only scratching the surface of your martial arts career. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your martial arts background? Because I'm not going to do it justice.
Cool. So I started Taekwondo when I was 5. My parents put me in, and I think like a lot of martial arts like that, like Taekwondo, karate, most places are not competitive, right? Very recreational. You learn your patterns, you get your belt, and that's kind of where that place was. But for me, I always had a passion for sparring, right? That was my favorite part, but we didn't do it. Like we would spar like once a year. And when we did, it was like no rules, like just go at it. And I still loved it. And I remember I would always beg the instructor, like, sign me up for tournaments. Like, let's go, like, tell me where they are. Right. So I remember going a couple times. He'd say, okay, here's the date, here's the time. I would show up and like no one would be there, like from my team. So there would be times where my dad would have to like sit on the coaching chair and like position the video camera like between his legs and like try to coach me. And he didn't know, he was just saying, faster, stronger, whatever. But it's still like that even experiences like that, it didn't put a bad taste in my mouth for competing. I just still wanted to do it. I eventually started to I switched clubs in 2011 to this place called Authentic Taekwondo in Markham, one of the suburbs of Toronto. And from there, like that's really where I took my game to the next level, right? I had a black belt at the time, but I was not a black belt level by any means. So I really had to almost relearn a lot of things, especially from a competitive standpoint. But it was cool because a lot of the competitive team, they were around my age. It was like five, six of us. So it was a really cool time. And I started to get better and better. And because I think that passion was there and that kind of hunger was there, I was able to add the technical stuff on top of that. I think it would have been harder to come from a place of that technical background being there, but not having that kind of grit behind it. So I'm definitely grateful of where I came from. I don't look back and think, man, I wasted those years at that other place. When I could have been sharpening my tools. I think, where I started kind of allowed me to build that toughness and that foundation. And I was able to build on top of that with the technical stuff. But, fast forward a few years later, I was, national champion, multi-time Ontario provincial champion. I was one of the first Canadians to win the US Open back to back. So the US Open is one of the biggest like international tournaments for Taekwondo. So to win it is like a really prestigious thing. And I won it back to back years in 2014 and 2015, which was really cool. And then, yeah, captain of Team Canada, traveling all over the world, name a country, probably been there, representing Canada on some of the biggest stages. And for me, like, that's really where I learned a lot of what it meant to like be a high performance competitor and like all the things that are involved, from the weight cut to the flights and the layovers and, the cities and countries where you don't speak the language, like all the things behind the scenes that you don't really think of when you anticipate a fight, but the things that end up making the biggest difference.
And for people that might not be familiar with Taekwondo, what would you correlate it to? I mean, is it similar to like karate sparring? Is it similar to kickboxing? Like, where would you put it in the realm of martial arts?
That's a good question. I think it has its similarities with karate. In terms of the rules, I mean, they're always changing it now. So I don't, you put me back in the ring, I'd have to figure it out. But it's full contact sparring. So, knockouts are allowed. It's 3 rounds of 2 minutes typically. You can kick from the waist up, so body, head, but you can only punch to the body. And that's the biggest difference, I think, between a lot of other sports and a lot of other martial arts. So only punching to the body, but kicks kind of everywhere. But what's cool about Taekwondo is kind of the technology aspect to it. So the chest protectors and the helmets that we wear are electronic. Same thing with our foot guards. So when you kick and you connect with enough force, it automatically registers as a point,
Oh my
which is
God,
cool
I had
to kind
no
of eliminate.
idea.
Yeah, so it eliminates some of the judge bias. I mean, there's always going to be problems, like nothing's perfect, but it's pretty cool where, yeah, it's electronic. So every weight division has a certain like pounds per pressure, like limit, based like how hard you need to kick to score a point. Different kicks are worth different amounts of points, headshots and whatever. So yeah, it's cool where, the referees will judge things like punches and things like that. But yeah, the electronic piece is there. So that's pretty cool too. And I think that's what separates it, is the ability to watch it and kind of make it make sense right away.
That's wild. I had no idea that was a thing. That is like,
Yeah.
so the one thing that always drives me crazy about kickboxing, MMA, like there's guidelines and rules of how to score, but one judge is never the same as the other judge.
Hmm.
It's always like you hear these scores and it's like 30-27, and then somebody has like 29-28, or even worse, and it's just like, how is this possible? Having like that electric aspect of it is so cool. I think imagine if that was like somehow incorporated into MMA. I don't know how they would do that, but that's pretty cool. But I digress. Mind lock is something that has totally changed my game. And I'm so appreciative of you and your organization. And for fighters that are potentially trying to better themselves with their mental game, getting on track, where can they find you and how can they get started?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the stuff is on Instagram. I kind of use Instagram as like a portfolio too, where you can kind of keep up to date with, our athletes and what's going on. So it's at mindlock with an underscore on Instagram. You can email me info@mindlock.ca. But yeah, if you know Instagram's the best way to go. Shoot me a DM, take a look at the page, see what we got going on. But yeah, that's it's a good space for everything. I like to kind of showcase a lot of stuff, and we have so many cool athletes doing crazy things, and I love kind of showcasing that. So yeah, that's really the best place, honestly. And we have a course that we just released in the fall. So if you're not really into the one-on-one thing, or if you're looking for something different, we have an online course. If you go to courses.mindlock.ca, a whole page where you can access the curriculum, go through the content, and really kind of take your training into your own hands. And it's a great way to get started too.
Dylan, you're the real MVP. And tonight, before I let you go, UFC 274, will you be watching?
Yes.
Okay. Gaethje versus Oliveira. Who do we got?
Man, Oliveira is dangerous. I'll never count him out. That weight cut,
I know.
I regardless of thoughts on the missed weight, I think it does something to you, when you get on the scale and, you've been visualizing, you step on the scale, no problem. You walk off, it messes with your routine. So for that reason alone, I'm going to give the edge to Gaethje, just because that little
Exactly
hiccup sometimes, can make a big difference, especially at the highest level, right? At a high level like that, where both guys are so kind of evenly matched and both can take that whole division. I think anyone can take it at any time. So I'm going to give the edge to Gaethje, just because of that little hiccup with the weigh-in. We'll see how he deals with that.
And Rose versus Esparza. Any predictions for that one?
Yeah, Thug Rose, I would say all day long. I mean,
all day.
Yeah. I mean, this might not age well. We'll see. But yeah, I think she when she's in her zone and she's locked in, which it looks like she has been for the last little bit, she's tough. So yeah, I'll give that to her too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dylan. You rock.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Appreciate it.